Well, unfortunately it's a dirty day here today, so we've got a mixture of window light and artificial light lighting up my workspace. So what were we up to yesterday? Right, I got as far as installing the sprocket shaft, and I hadn't put the rewind button on yet, but the rewind button has to go back. So find the right container here. I've got these parts carefully segregated so that I can find things instantly. Of course I can't find things instantly because I pick up the wrong container, but that's life as we know it. So I'll start with the spring, return spring for the rewind button. I'll put a little bit of synthetic grease through that. Put the spring in place on the shaft of the button. Put the washer in place, then holding my finger on the top of the shaft here so it doesn't press up, I'll screw that into position on the bottom of the sprocket shaft. Check that it's moving freely. That's good. That tells me that I haven't got it trapped behind, the washer's not trapped underneath or anything. Right, now if I just tighten that up with my magic pliers, that is done. I'm just about ready to close up the bottom of the camera now. So first I need to tension my film advance so that there's spring tension to return the film advance lever to the rest position. So I'll just pulled up my lock lever out of position, pushed it to one side, and this needs to be rotated one full turn. And I'll drop my lock lever back down in position to hold it there. Now my film advance is tensioned one full turn. I can put the cover plate on. Now I've got to be very careful. If I hit the film release button, the shaft at the top there, it will unlatch and spin down, and I'll have to go through the business of opening it up and putting everything back. So I've got to be careful not to put this down on the tabletop. I'm sure if I was doing the same model day in, day out in numbers, it would be worth having a jig to hold the camera for tasks like this. But I'm not, and I'm too lazy to make one. So there are 3 nickel plated screws that hold their cover on, and I can fit the film advance lever. Once I'm satisfied everything works well, I'll take the lever back off and I can put the leatherette in place. I have a choice of pieces of leatherette recovered from previous casualties. So I'll just check the action. That's good, that's nice and smooth. That's exactly as it should be. So, what about the cocking rack? Well, the cocking rack, I've had a look at it. I've done my best to form the teeth back into the correct shape, and I think it'll probably work. But it'll work, it's just whether it works well enough. I'll pop that in place in the body. Just take that rubber band off for the moment because it's in my way. Put the clamp plate here. I'll put the post the guidepost for the film release button. I'll just run that loosely down. Screw goes here. I think that's correctly positioned. It looks about right to me. I'll test it. If I need to pull it back one tooth, I will. And this screw here on the strap bracket is only going in temporarily because it has to go through the exposure meter when that's fitted. Well, the rack certainly moves freely enough. I'm checking the play here, the float, to see how much engagement I've got here, see how much backlash there is. There's a little bit much space there. It's not bad though. I'll see if I can improve that any. There's always wear, and there is always tolerances from manufacturing. Most components aren't pinned with dowels or anything. It's not as though their position is absolutely fixed. The holes that the screws go through have a certain amount of clearance. So I'm slackening off these two screws that hold the bush for the film advance in place, and I'm pushing the film advance shaft over towards the rack as far as I can get it to go, and tightening those screws up to see if it's moved at all. I think that's pretty good, and all I've done there is take advantage of the wear or tolerance in the holes that the screws pass through, and I've just ensured that the gear on the top of the advance shaft and the rack are pushed as close together as I can get them to go, which still leaves some backlash, but it's better, it looks better to me than it was previously. Well, that's good. The film advance is certainly working well. I don't know how well it will cock the shutter because we haven't really tested the bottom end of the rack to see whether those teeth are in a good enough state. So my next trick is to put the shutter and lens assembly back in here and see how well it cocks. I'll be feeling the action of the film advance as it goes and trying to detect whether there's any undue roughness or whether there's any problem there, any tightness, anything that suggests that the tooth profile is too badly out to work reliably for a considerable length of time. Okay, let's try this shutter assembly. Which is all cleaned, serviced and ready to race. That in position. See if it cocks. Well, it certainly cocked the shutter. I'm just listening to pick the point at which it cocks. I think I want to advance the coupling by one tooth because it cocked pretty much at the exact instant that the film advance was released to return to the rest position. So I'll shift my position of this rack, this curved rack here, by one tooth to advance it. And I'll check the action again to make sure it doesn't come up against a hard stop. No, I've just moved that the wrong way. That's what comes with doing work while you're talking to people. That's better. No, that's fine. That feels absolutely fine. The timing is good. And I can fit the retaining ring in place at the back of the camera. And I'll just tighten that up. Now here the shutter is releasing before the film advance is released, before the film release lever activates. So I'm just going to bring that screw up a turn or so. Now it still wants more. It's pretty close, it's right on the edge I'd say, so half a turn, we'll give that a go. That's it. The film advance is releasing at very much the same point that the shutter releases. That's cocking and firing reliably. The film advance feels smooth. I'm quite happy with the state of that shutter cocking rack as a result. So that means I can plough on. So what I'll do here is I will temporarily put the top cover on the camera, flip it over and deal with the leatherette on the base of the camera. Then I can come back and put the rangefinder in place, put the meter in place and finish closing the camera up once the rangefinder's been adjusted. So I'll put a single screw in at this end of the top cover. This is to stop the top cover coming adrift while I'm working, because if the top cover came adrift then the shutter release shaft could fall out, and if the shutter release shaft fell out I would have problems. Right, so to the base of the camera. I can remove the film advance lever. You'll notice I'd only put that on there with 2 screws anyway. And I want the leatherette for the base. The leatherette, of course, that was on there was destroyed. I've got another piece here which is in pretty good order. It's broken away where that screw was. Well, you might remember that the original piece was also broken away where that screw was. So what I'll do is, where this piece is broken away, I'm going to cut that out neatly and I'm going to put a patch in there to patch that up. I think that's the best way to deal with that. This has come off a camera, probably a very incomplete camera that I gathered up at some stage to use for parts. There's a break in the leatherette here too, but that'll largely disappear. So I've just got to trim this off neatly and then find another piece of leatherette to make a patch from. I noticed that this edge here is not in stunning condition, but once it's tucked down in the body and the advanced lever is over it, there's nothing to see there really. So to trim the leatherette, I'll need to find a nice sharp scalpel blade. The leatherette is probably fairly brittle, It can be troublesome trying to trim them when they're brittle because they fracture rather than cutting smoothly, cutting cleanly. That'll do. That's a nice clean cut, and it means I'll be able to match a patch in there now to get that correct. That leatherette looks okay, just looking at the back of it. This obviously hasn't been cleaned off. To be a bit gentle round there. It's got, there's another break in it there. Once it's glued back down, any of these cuts or nicks will tend to disappear. The vast majority of them anyway. That'll do. I'll just have to wipe that with solvent before I put that down. So I'll clean off the back of this leatherette with some naphtha. And I'm just wiping to make sure that there's no grease or oil on there, which would stop the adhesive from doing its job. That's good. Now for some adhesive. I'm squirting out adhesive directly to the leatherette here, which is okay if you got plenty of experience at it and you're careful. But best practice is to squirt the glue onto a piece of paper and then transfer it to the leatherette on a toothpick. So to make sure you get it exactly where you want it, not too much and not too little. Need a bit more. I'll put a blob here and spread it about. Worth making sure you have your adhesive spread right to the edges, and anywhere there's a cut or a break in it, you need to make sure that the adhesive is present on both sides of the cut so that you don't end up with a flap lifting. That'll do, I think. I think that looks good. So let me flip this in place on the body and then see about a patch. Leatherettes usually shrink back with age as they dry out, so they often don't fit smoothly round raised bosses like this. This one's not a bad example in that regard. Now you might remember there was a cut or a break across here. That's disappeared. There was a break across here. That's effectively disappeared too. I also know there was a break or a crack in it right here, and that appears to have disappeared too for all practical purposes. So the leatherette's in place, and I need to cut a patch to go into cover that spot there. So first of all I'll put my advance lever in place. I've also got to find a patch, a leatherette patch for the advance lever, because the original piece of leatherette from there was rubbish. It was much the same as the leatherette on the base of the camera, and the leatherette on the base of the camera was fragile. The cloth itself was strong, but the plastic coating that forms the pattern on the top of the coating was dried out and brittle. So as I went to lift the leatherette to remove it from the camera, it was just flaking away in tiny scales, and it would have meant you'd have effectively had a cloth cover instead of the patterned imitation leather finish of the leatherette. Well, that looks good. I've got to find a scrap piece of leatherette from my vast bin of scrap pieces of leatherette and cut a patch. Back shortly. This is my container of old used leatherette and leather for Retina cameras, and it's filled with scraps like this, some worse than others, for various different models of Retina. So what I'm looking for now is something with the right pattern for that Retina IIIc, preferably a small piece, something that is very damaged and unfit for any other purpose. That's similar, but that's actually leather. That's not what I'm looking for. I also want a leatherette patch. Let's see if I can get a better one than that. You can see some of this stuff is quite damaged, but it's good for cutting patches from. What's that? That would probably do. I'll cut a little patch out of this and glue it in place. Okay, I've cut a patch. It's not perfect, but it's pretty good. So I'm just going to put some glue on that now and stick it in place. I'll just put some glue on here, and I'll do that by putting some glue on a piece of paper first, which you can see nothing of. And then I'll transfer that glue to the back of that leatherette patch. I can see that the tip of that leatherette patch is already broken away. I knew it was very brittle. Let's see if that'll make any difference to us. Probably not. Let's put a spot of... That tip is so tiny. I can't even tell which way it's up. No, I'm not going to do anything with that little missing piece. I'm going to leave that exactly as it is. Come on, camera, focus. It's thinking about it. Okay, so there's our patch in place. It looks pretty good to me. I might put a tip. I don't think I'll do anything to it. I think that's good enough. I don't think that can be really seen at all. So I've got to find a leatherette patch for here, and I've pretty much already decided I'm going to be cutting one from this piece of leather, which is a very similar grain. So I've just got to go down, find the right wad cutter and cut that patch out. Back shortly. Well, as you can see, I've managed to cut a patch for that with a wad punch. The wad punch is a homemade one made from a piece of steel tube. It was the right size by the time its edges have been beveled down. I'm running around the edges of the leather here with a black pen. That's because Unlike the leatherette, the leather is only coloured on the surface, not all the way through, and the edges show up if you don't do this. So I've done that, and I'll put some adhesive on the back of that leather and put that in place. Now this was from a sheet of Morocco leather I bought from Micro Tools many years ago. Well, many years ago in internet terms anyway. So there's our leatherette patch, and the grain of that is not dissimilar to the leatherette, or our leather patch is not dissimilar to the leatherette on the base of the camera. Next I need to put the back catch cover in place. And those components are here, so I'll just clean those quickly with some naphtha. As usual, I'm just wanting to remove dust and grit in the main. There shouldn't be any oil or grease down on these components. That looks fine. And have I got the screws? 1, 2, and the return spring. Get this in place. So the procedure: put one of the screws through the top, through the cover, put the lever part in place with the large opening. There's 2 slots in that lever. You want the large opening. Fit the spring in position between the screw and the lever, and it should clip in there with a bit of luck. That spring's a little bit mutilated and a little bit lacking in enthusiasm to stay where it's put. So much so that it's just popped out. Let's have a look, see if I can put that in the other way round. It might stay. It's just a bit distorted at the end here, so it wants to pop away. Try that again, holding my finger underneath so the screw doesn't get away. Pull that spring into position. There's the spring tucked in between the screw and the end of the lever. Now I've got to get this on the body without disturbing the spring or the screw. That's it there. Run that screw in. Check that the spring returns the lever to the rest position. It appears to work nicely. Put the screw on the other side. Check it's still working. Tighten the 2 screws. They're very small screws. They're only chrome brass. They're quite easily damaged. There we have it. So that'll do for the base of the camera. My leatherette patch, is that shifted as the glue is dried? Push that back into tight contact. I will go over that with some black wax just to fill that edge up, but not just yet. That's the base of the camera dealt with for the moment anyway. So I can go back to dealing with the top of the camera. So I'll remove the 2 screws from the top cover. Well, just check that the screws I've put in are tight, because I really just put things in temporarily there. Make sure this guide post is down snug, that's good. At this stage, I think I'll probably want to put the rangefinder on now and deal with that. So the rangefinder is all cleaned and serviced. I'm looking for my red lacquer. I'll back shortly. Right, let's get this rangefinder in position. So I'll put a wipe of molybdenum paste on the back of the cam here where it couples to the screw head there. I'm going to put a touch of lacquer on the base so that once it's screwed down tight it's unlikely to shift. Put it in position, hopefully drop the screws into place and do them up, and then do the adjustments. The first of them. Get those screws up firmly, and I'll check what that looks like out looking through the window here. It looks good. Certainly don't meet at infinity. The adjustment needs to be made here. There are good reasons why whenever you disturb the rangefinder, like removing it from the top of the camera and putting it back, that you're going to need to adjust it again afterwards. And one is that the position of the rangefinder on the body, because of the screw holes and so forth, could be left, right, backwards and forwards at an angle from where it had been previously, and a small difference there makes a big difference in the image. That's quite good. My moving image appears to be slightly high, so I'll just make an adjustment here. Still high. It's always an act balancing these up so that it works correctly. That appears pretty good. I'm just going to lock that there and check the close focus end of the scale and see what that looks like. I've got a measured distance here. I'll come back after I've sorted that out. That all checks out as very good. That's great. So, what do I need to do? Film release. Oh, I'll put the film release button first. It's just a wipe of molybdenum paste through the centre there, where it slides on the post. Put its spring in position. Put that on its post. And the exposure meter. Now here I'm going to lock that screw on the top of the film advance there with a couple of dots of lacquer. You don't need to flood that with lacquer, it just needs a tiny bit to encourage it not to rattle loose. It's not particularly prone to rattling loose, but sometimes it can. I'm going to put a little bit of synthetic grease here and at the back of that rack. And put my meter in place. Put the screw back down here at the end. It holds the meter to the body at that point. And there's another one in here. It looks somewhat chewed up looking. Check that's all moving freely. Do that screw up. I'll do the other one up tight too. Pop my shutter release button in position. Check the window on the top of the meter, it looks quite good. Slide the top cover on. Now here, this might be a bit of a wriggle. Sometimes the meter's not sitting exactly square. To make sure this is sitting down into the body correctly, that looks good. I'm checking the film release at the moment to feel the point at which the shutter releases and see if it releases the film advance at the same time, and it did not. I was able to get the shutter to release before the film advance released, so I'm going to back that screw up slightly. Try it again. Get that top cover clipped down correctly. No, a bit more. This would be fine for somebody who's heavy-handed like me, but if somebody is very good at gently releasing the shutter, they will manage to release the shutter without releasing the film advance, and they'll find it very frustrating. So I've got to get that adjustment just right. Squeezing the advance very slowly, the shutter release very slowly. No, didn't release the film advance. I'm surprised at the amount of adjustment I've had to do there. Normally it's closer than that. Yeah, that time I could hear it releasing the film advance. That's good. Now the frame counter. The frame counter here is moving far too far. It's well out of adjustment. So that means that probably the rack had been incorrectly positioned previously. That needs to be screwed in quite a way. And if that is as incorrectly adjusted as it was, that could lead to failure of your cocking rack It's moving just very slightly too far now. That's good. That was pretty much looked exactly as it should. Yep, I'll just shift that in a bit more. I want that so that the numbers line up right in the centre of the V. All the lines line up right in the centre of the V. And that's it, I think. So the frame count is good, our shutter release is good, the rangefinder is good. I'll lift the top once more, give it a final check over and clean. Check that I haven't managed to put a fingerprint on the viewfinder, because I'm very good at that. It looks pretty good. I'll just give that a final clean. I know I've got a fingerprint on. Well, that was just my usual race against time with the camera batteries. I've cleaned those viewfinder windows. I'll put the top cover back on. Make sure it's tucked in correctly. That all appears good. 2 chrome screws on the top cover at the end here. One chrome screw on the top cover at this end. That's all looking good. Now the rewind knob. That had a washer underneath it. Put the cap on there, put that on, and our rewind knob is here. It seems to move smoothly. And that is just about it. So what do I want to do here? Well, the leatherette at the bottom, I'm going to put some black wax over that to cover the imperfections there. I can't really do that until that adhesive has had a chance to completely harden up. But otherwise, we have a good and complete working Retina IIIc. Meter dial works. I'll report back as to how accurate that meter is. I don't expect that it will be accurate, but you never know your luck in a big city or Dunedin. Back later. Well, time has passed. I've checked the exposure meter on this. It's one stop out in bright light. Probably incorrect at low light. I didn't bother checking it any further down the scale. I doubt that it's recording correctly right across the range. The selenium cell had been left out, exposed to light for a considerable period of time, of course, because it had lost the flap completely. But otherwise, the camera is now complete. Leatherette on the base to replace the piece that died on the operating table, and generally speaking it looks quite good, I think. So hopefully the owner will be pleased with this. I didn't have to replace the shutter cocking rack, which is always a bonus. That puts them $50 a head. And so I had to replace the meter housing, the leatherette on the base of the camera, the shoe, and of course the leatherette patch that was also ruined from the Film Advanced lever there. Otherwise, not an awful lot. So it should be a nice usable camera now. And I don't know what its destiny is, whether it's destined to be used as a daily photo taker or whether it's destined to go into somebody's collection shelf. I hope it's a photo taker because it's not pretty enough for a collection shelf. Right, thanks for watching.